Welcome into the Spiritual Evolution podcast. Um, I just wanted to make a video regarding the tariffs and what that means for the international economy, what it means for the American economy, why I believe it's not a good policy in so many ways. And this is not, a political statement. Um, I have my own views, but it has nothing to do with, me being against or for any politician. Um, and Rudolf Steiner talked about, in anthroposophy. As anthroposophists, we have to be, non-judgmental, um, not biased, and definitely not political. He said that in the karmic relationships lectures, that we cannot be political. And I think that that's a good thing to go by. So Rudolf Steiner gave a lot to the world, and one of the things that he gave was the threefold social order. The threefold social order, to separate the cultural and spiritual from the economic and from the political and sphere of rights. And so, in terms of the international economy and what is happening, currently, Trump has basically used emergency powers, which he's now used 3 times. In less than 100 days, he's declared 3 national emergencies. One is the emergency at the border, one is an energy emergency, and one is an emergency regarding free trade or trade in general, a trade deficit. And it's possible that some of these, if not all, will be overturned in the courts, hopefully, because we don't really want, a dictator or a tyranny, someone who is using emergency powers, just like they did during the COVID lockdowns, just like they did at other times. And we've always fought, people, a lot of the people who voted for Trump fought against the use of emergency powers, right? We, as the people in this Michaelic age, we want more freedom, not less freedom. And emergency powers, it gives the executive branch of government much more power than at any other time, when they're not using those powers. It gives them sweeping powers, right? Sweeping powers. And sweeping powers leads to less freedom for individuals. We know that Steiner also said that, capitalism will be will destroy the earth. And so, I would say this is like what I would say is right now the stock market is crashing. And so capital is flowing out of corporations, which in some ways is good, because, a lot of these corporations are carrying out darker agendas, whether they are aware of that or not, especially the big tech companies that really the Mag 7, right, who run the markets basically. They're suffering and losing value. Um, but right now, and so the idea is to, in some ways lessen the wealth gap, I guess, is kind of, at least that's what the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is saying, um, you know, that we don't care about the stock market. So it's like the first presidency that has really said that. We'll see if they stick to that. Um, we have so many problems in the US, and 50% of our GDP comes from the top 10% of consumers and spenders. And so the wealth gap is just absolutely insane at this point. And a lot of those people own assets, they own stocks. Because of this, they are now, that 50% of our GDP is now going to be coming down because those people have less money to spend. Unless they got out, at the right time. But so our economy is really based on the stock market in some ways, because so it's really, our economy has been built around this capitalistic system. It's not built around, neighborly brother and sister coming together to exchange skills and goods on a peer-to-peer basis, right? And so is this a collapse of that capitalistic system, which in some ways would be good? So there's good and bad, right? We have to look for the positives in everything. Now, I'm sure a lot of you out there have money in a 401k or Roth IRA, or you're retired, you might have money in the markets. And so I'm not saying to go out and do anything necessarily, although I do manage a few different people's retirement accounts, so that is something that I do, and I did get them out. So, at the top, and I follow a certain process, which is with Hedgeye. Keith McCullough from Hedgeye, I think, is the best in the business. And so he's a trader, he's a hedge fund manager, but he has a process and a system that creates an objective decision-making process rather than a subjective process. So it's not based on what he thinks, it's based on the objective model and kind of the machine of how the markets really work. So anyway, that's a little bit of an aside. So there are good things, but then there are bad things, which is, humanity wants spiritual freedom. They want democracy, and they want social economy and world economy without disruptions from politics. And so that's what Steiner said in his book, Toward Social Renewal, which is a series of essays that he wrote on the threefold social order. Actually, it's called The Renewal of the Social Organism. So actually, yeah, it's I believe that's what it's called. There's a few different books that he's written on this and essays. So, but the idea is the same. And the economy withers away if it is built upon a centrally oriented administration. So we can talk about this. I mean, the government basically has been propping the market up over the past however many years with the Federal Reserve printing money, increasing our debt to crazy levels, 38 trillion. And so now Trump has this idea with Scott Bessent to lower the debt and to do it, through tariffs and through increased growth, less regulation. But at the same time, like they're trying to lessen the taxes for the rich. So that doesn't really, it's gonna even out. And so it's not the best. I don't believe that's the right thing right now. But we'll see how that plays out. I think they're going to lessen taxes for everyone. Um, but again, we are $38 trillion in debt. Um, and so, you know, with tariffs and with the deficit that we have, there is a situation where eventually this system could be breaking down. Because at the end of the day, you can't just have the way that the system is working and works. The stock market cannot have sustained drawdowns that last like the depression or like the 2000s, where the stock market didn't make a new all-time high for the S&P or the Nasdaq, I guess, until 2014. So it went from 2000 to 2014. So that's 14 years. And people just don't have the attention span for it. I mean, our economy has become so hyper financialized that we rely so heavily on the markets that we're down 20% and everyone's freaking out about it. In 2008, it went down 50%, right? In 2000, the NASDAQ went down 80%. And I think we underestimate the chaos that these tariffs are creating. And so, Steiner recommended a unified world economy. So globalism, he recommended globalism. And a lot of people, talk about globalism in a bad light because it's kind of like this conspiracy theory that there's globalists, right? There's these globalists, the World Economic Forum, they're kind of centrally planning the entire world economy. And in some ways that is correct, right? There's people like Klaus Schwab and all these people who are trying to plan the economy for this like digital sort of future where we're all like kind of in this metaverse hooked up to machines on like a central bank digital currency and all this stuff. So that's all bad stuff. And so Trump is kind of moving us away from that. But at the same time, we can't have nationalism. Nationalism is a one-way track to the Ahrimanic incarnation that Steiner discussed. He said that nationalism will bring us to that point. And we need free trade. We need global free trade. And basically what Steiner said is tariffs should only be implemented if the threefold social order of that particular country is under threat from another country. Then we would protect that threefold social order through tariffing that other country. At this point, we do not have a threefold social order in any context, anywhere. But that's kind of what he would say about tariffs, that we should have free trade. He said that economic life and striving should move beyond strictly national structure. He said that economic pursuits sought to promote people's their own interests by means of politics during World War One, or leading up to World War One. And so we have many different issues. It's not just our educational system. It's not just our economy. It's not just our culture, spiritual life. It's not just the rights and the sphere of rights in the political system. It's really all of these things. Steiner said that if we don't change this, it could be too late very soon. We are past now 100 years after Steiner has passed away, and we only have now a little bit less than 200. In fact, we are almost halfway through the Michaelic age. We are definitely more than a third. We're not quite at a half, but we may only have 170 years remaining in the Michaelic age. And we know that the Michaelic age, we must bring in the spirit, bring in the freedom of people, that we have full freedom. And I'm worried that with an economic collapse, which again was probably due for, right? It happens every 90 years. Like this could be a 90-year event that people they just weren't paying attention to the longer term cycles. And so I recommend this book called The Changing World Order by Ray Dalio, where he talks about these longer term cycles. And he gives you an idea of the rise, the fall, and the collapse of empires, right? And now we're in the American empire. But my worry is that as we collapse, we come into a more technologically advanced society with an economic collapse and chaos, then that sort of brings through the Aramonic incarnation, right? That sort of a rise from the ashes, if you will, that would come, and people would give away their rights and their freedom to some kind of solution to the chaos, the collapse, and the problems that we will face. So this is potentially the start of something like that. And of course, we know that Steiner said that this would happen in the third millennium, at the beginning of the third millennium, which is where we're at now. Because if you take 0 to 1,000 is 1, 1,000 to 2,000 is 2, 2,000 to 3,000 is the third millennium. So we are at that point. I've read a book that predicted 2028 as that time frame that it would happen, based on the number of the beast, which that number times 3 is 1998, plus 30 is 2028, as an imitation of the Christ coming in at the 30th year of Jesus of Nazareth. And so I've always had that date and actually the book is called, Mark of the Beast. It's related to the Spear of Destiny from Trevor Rosen. I always forget. I'm gonna look it up, but you'll recognize the cover most likely. I don't know why I always mess that up, but I apologize. Trevor Ravenscroft. So that's a book that I would also recommend. And so we are at a point of disruption. And the other issue is that the tariffs are meant to bring the jobs back home, right? To manufacturing jobs. Okay. These are the very jobs that are soul crushing, spirit crushing. You are working at that job 100% to survive, not out of free will. There is no free will involved there. I've been to these manufacturing places. I've done tours there, many of them, and I know what it's like. I've seen the conditions. Yes, they're better potentially than they were back then, but they're worse in different ways. You are under heavily bright LED lights, which only emit one color. Okay, LED lights are not good. You need to get incandescent lights because they emit all the colors of the sun. LEDs emit one color, just like screens. So if you have a blue light on your screen and you're watching this, you need to get the Iris app. The Iris app, IRIS. You can then lower the brightness and lower the color and make it more red color. Anyway, that's the conditions that these people are working in. And for every 5 people this year, baby boomer generation, that is retiring, we are only replacing them with 2 people from the younger generations in those jobs. People don't want to work those jobs. They would rather sit at home, do nothing, and live off of unemployment or live off of their parents or something else. And I don't blame them. But at the same time, that is also soul crushing. So both of those ends are soul crushing. In one way, you're being crushed by the Ahrimanic, and in one way, you're being crushed by the Luciferic, right? Because the Luciferic is more like you are staying home and you're in isolation from the world. You've been lost to the world, or the world has lost you. And in the other side, the Ahrimanic manufacturing, you're being lost in the world. You were going straight into the belly of the beast just to survive. And you're working monotonous jobs where you're just like ripping packages, opening, doing things like this just constantly the whole time, just the same things, doing different things like that. And you do rotate throughout the manufacturing facility to do these different jobs. But there's no natural light. I mean, it's terrible. I can't even be in there for more than an hour. I don't know how people can do it full time, let alone for their whole life to survive. Now, so where are all these jobs going to be? Who are they going to be given to? And some people might say, oh, well, the robots are coming, right? The NVIDIA people, the Tesla people, et cetera. They give us this utopian future of the robots, but it's not. It's BS. It's not realistic. I've gone to these places. I've asked them that question. There is no way that that is going to happen. I've seen the work that these people do, and the stuff that just can't be automated, it just can't be automated. You're never going to get a robot that is able to do all of those things. I mean, I'm not going to say never, but it's not going to come for another 20 years at least. That's my opinion. Some people say it'll be here by 2030, etc. I just don't see it. I mean, that's also dystopian, right? Because, we then at that point, we're all just getting paid by the government, and the government almost at that point just takes over all the spheres, which it already sort of has anyway. So these are just some things to think about. It's a difficult thing to try to look at the future like this, because it's not pretty. It's not the best looking thing currently, but we have to live in reality. We have to, again, try to be non-biased, non-judgmental, and just see the reality of what is happening for what it is. And it's very difficult because if you go out there onto the internet and try to figure this stuff out, there is a Luciferic everywhere, right? Because it's illusions. These are people having their own subjective opinions everywhere about spiritual stuff, about economics, about culture, about technology. It's all of this subjective mess, right? This illusion, this subjectiveness. But there's, and then, you go out into the world, and where is the beautiful architecture? Where is the culture, the town square? The town square now, it's on the internet, it's in Twitter, right? It's like the digital town square. So where do you go? And then you may have friendships with people who all have these different little subjective opinions that you disagree with, and you avoid, communicating with them because you feel like you can't be fully transparent, that you can't understand one another, right? And at that point, we're getting closer to the war of all against all. Everyone's ego becomes so strong and hardened that we then battle against each other with these subjective opinions. And that's why we need an objective spiritual science, something that is objective, something that is pure truth, right? And that's the saving grace that we have in some ways. And Steiner said that we do need to be continuously more individual in our development, and we will develop more of an individual relationship with Christ that will be similar to everyone else's relationship to Christ, and that we should develop our ego. But we are not just developing our ego for ourselves or for subjective opinions. We're doing it in the course of our destiny, where we are trying to get out into the community, get out into the world, and to do better and do good things for people. And that's really difficult nowadays because people are more and more isolated. There's less opportunities to go out and do things because it's so Armanized, right? But Jesus said we have to be in the world, not of the world. But people forget the in the world part, right? That's also important. It's half of the phrase, in the world. You have to be in the world. And so that's the balance, right? That's the in the world part. He's saying you have to balance out Lucifer. And the not of the world part, he's saying you have to balance out Ahriman. Because if you are of the world, we know the world is Ahrimanized. So you are then Ahrimanized. If you are not in the world, then you are, again, isolated in your own illusions and subjectivity. And Steiner said we need to balance those two forces out. We need to be objective about our own inner emotions. We have to be cold-blooded, and we have to be dispassionate about our own inner passions and views and subjective nature. And then looking out in the world, we have to bring our interest to that world. We have to bring our fire and our passion and our Luciferic interest into the Ahrimanic world, right? That's how we balance those two forces out. This is not an easy thing. Like I said, this is not an easy thing. But he has clearly laid out the path for us, and it makes perfect sense. This is the one thing. I mean, it's not the one. I'm not saying it's the one thing as if it's like, some a religion or something. What I'm saying is he's laid out a human path for us. He's laid out a path for us. And that's what anthroposophy is, right? It's how to live a human life in the current changing and evolving spiritual and environment that we're in, because we are changing spiritually and the environment is changing spiritually, and we are constantly in flux with that environment, with our own spiritual selves. And in some ways, as the chaos continues, we have to be even more wary of that chaos coming into our own inner life, right? Um, because our soul, in some ways, is the reflection of the world and the cosmos. So we know there's a war in heaven always happening. That's like reflecting back on our earth, and that's why we're getting these crazy events. And we have to be a part of that battle, which means, again, being in the world. But the hardest part is finding where we fit in that battle and not thinking of it. So yeah, finding our destiny, finding our place in the world. Um, for me, it's difficult because I feel there's all these problems. Steiner says to find your destiny in the world, you have to understand the problems of the world and then dedicate yourself to those problems. And, I've always wanted to help people and I've always wanted to do good for the world. And, trying to find ways to do that. Like I coach basketball team. I work at a career center. Those are just two things. But like sometimes the littlest things are what you were meant to do. So we can be tempted in the Luciferic nature to withdraw from those things to, have this grand sort of spiritual, um, you know, path where we, live out on a farm somewhere and maybe we're just, reading Steiner books all day. We're not really engaging with the world. We're just sort of engaging with our own spiritual um, dreams and things that we want to do. Um, and so, sorry, I mean, some of this might be harsh for some people to hear, but it's just the reality of where we are at. And some of the problems I look at is like the younger generation. These people are on their phones constantly. They're on screens. They have the wireless devices. They're just getting radiated by EMF all day. They're under fluorescent and LED lights at school, which is again just one light, one color of light. And no one seems to care. Like we, again, and so, one of my ideas is to become like a life coach or a counselor. Um, and because I see that younger generation coming through and just knowing that it's kind of like this exponential chart of these kids who all have all this anxiety. And they're all just prescribed medicines. They're not given the path, right? They're not given the path forward that they need. And I believe that I have a path that I have formulated based on anthroposophy, based on some of the research that I've done in regards to light, soul exercises, diet, and just understanding of the anthroposophical concepts that I'm sort of laying out here. But as we move more and more into this chaotic nature and this chaotic life, I think it's more incumbent than ever upon us to try to help people. Jesus said, love one another as I have loved you. And that was his one commandment. That's his main commandment. That is the commandment of the consciousness soul age. And really, it's the commandment of the rest of the earth that we are part of, this planetary earth, until the next cycle. And even beyond that, even further beyond that. I don't think it will, I think is an everlasting commandment. But again, that's very difficult, right? It can be. I mean, let's just be honest about it. Like, it's difficult when you disagree. And again, you have the subjective nature that you just want to cling on to. And I had difficulty with this. So there is times, I'm not saying that I follow, all this stuff or any of this stuff in reality. I want to, but I am a flawed person. Um, because the issue I have is when you want to argue with someone, which again, Rudolf Steiner argued with plenty of people, debated plenty of people, called out plenty of people. Almost every other lecture, he's calling someone out for being wrong. And he is afforded the right to do that because we know who he is, right? Um, in some ways, he is the most important and exalted spirit that has ever incarnated on earth. If you know who he was before his incarnation as Rudolf Steiner. I'm not going to get into that now, but there is a rule that hasn't been followed, but to me, after 100 years, after someone passes away, in the Rosicrucian way, you can then reveal who that person really is, and it's not an issue. That's at least what Steiner has said about Christian Rosenkreuz and his incarnations, that no one can actually know who he is until 100 years after. So I don't know if that applies to Rudolf Steiner as a Rosicrucian initiate. It might, but I'm not going to get into that now. But my issue is that when when you try to have the most objective understanding of something, an objective reality, like let's just say the economy, an economic gravitational reality of what is happening, just like a math problem, right? Just like geometry, just like logic, what Steiner tries to teach us about the world, right? We want to try to be logical, grounded in reality, right? Um, in the Platonic way of pure logic. He had his pupils study geometry as the prerequisite to coming into initiation into the deeper mysteries of the Platonic school, which you don't really find much about. Because it was very secretive, especially back then, because people were not prepared. Not everyone was prepared as they are now. All of us at this point, for the most part, are prepared. We don't need to be as pure as they had to be back then and, leading up to our age, um, as they did back then. But for me, it's just hard because you see that everyone has like a subjective opinion about everything, right? And you try to have an objective understanding. And when you say, okay, that person has a subjective understanding and they are wrong, how do I get to a place of objectivity to try to tell them what is right, because a lot of people follow these people, right, on Twitter and all that. Like they rely on these people to give them advice or whatever it might be. And everyone sort of has their opinions and they just stick to their opinion. They just stick to their opinion. They're just for years. For example, these people who think that interest rates are going up forever, they're going to stay higher for longer. That's a constant narrative that we hear because of the deficit and the debt. But in reality, the treasury market is the collateral of the entire system. So when the system is breaking down, people rush into the collateral that holds the system together, which is treasuries, which means bonds go up. So if you have an objective understanding of that, and you understand that it's not based on the supply, the treasury market's not based on supply and demand. There's an infinite amount of demand for treasuries because they are the collateral of the whole system. So when you understand that, you understand the entire Eurodollar system, the entire global monetary network and system is based on treasuries as a collateral asset. There's an infinite demand for that because then you can borrow against it and get dollars. Now, will this be changing with the deglobalization? Possibly. I'm not going to say these people are going to be wrong. I'm saying they're wrong in the short term. As an objective reality that bonds are in a bull market now, and you want to be long bonds in this environment. I'm not saying you want to hold them forever. But I guess so that's just an example of something, but I'm probably going on a lot of tangents here. But at the end of the day, like where we're headed is not great. We're going to have strength, really, really, really strong wills, and to have an ethical individualism through Christ and through the philosophy of freedom. Because the philosophy of freedom is how we develop a relationship with Christ in our reality. And it doesn't say that in the book, but he does say that in other lectures. He always comes back to the philosophy of freedom. And so again, I know there's so much out there that he has put out. And I think the philosophy of freedom is very difficult for all of us. But I think it's difficult for a reason. And I think there's a lot that is hidden in there that can bring us closer to Christ and bring us closer to the path that we need to go on to be in the world today. So I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, please like, subscribe, and yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. We can have a conversation, try to make it more of a peer-to-peer thing. And yeah, I'll talk to you next time.